This is gospel music. This particular style is known as African American contemporary gospel music and has deep ties to the early African American spiritual songs and hymns of the late 1800s. There are many who cite pastor and musician Thomas A. Dorsey as the father of modern gospel music. In the late 1920s, Dorsey combined jazz and blues with Christian hymns and prayers. Dorsey's songs became so powerful, they often had people dancing in the aisles during a service. Since the 1920s, gospel music has grown, both culturally and musically. Today, some of the best-known musicians in the world come from African American church bands. These musicians also work alongside some of today's biggest names in music. For years I tried to emulate the gospel guitarists I'd heard. They seem to have effortlessly mastered all kinds of guitar styles, yet have a unique sound and voice of their own. It was only after a decade of trying to crack the code of gospel guitar playing did I stumble across something I had previously overlooked. It was their picking approach. The gospel guitar style centres around a specific picking technique. For the purposes of this film, I'll be referring to this technique as the backward picking technique. The backward picking technique enables gospel guitarists to execute speed and accuracy with a warm, rounded guitar tone. This technique allows for greater musicality and confidence while preventing tension. I explored working with the backward picking technique, and I've found it's the best way to emulate the sound and feel demonstrated by gospel guitar players. Cool. Okay, so before we start talking about backward picking, we should get an idea about standard picking, what it is, how we can use it, and more importantly, how we can hold the pick. So why don't we start there? I am going to use this GoPro camera, which is attached to my guitar, to show you a few things. So what we're going to do is we're going to pinch the pick, similar to the way that your grandma or auntie might pinch your cheeks when she sees you on your birthday. So curve your index finger. I'll trace my thumb across it right now. You want to curve your index finger like so. You want to have a bit of a bend in your thumb. It's going to look like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to pinch between the pad of our thumb, which is that right there, and the distal phalanx of our index finger. So let me see if I can get that in frame. So the distal phalanx is this, the end, oh man, this is really tricky. The end bone of your index finger is called your distal phalanx, and we are going to pinch between the side of the distal phalanx and the pad of our thumb, and we are going to slide our guitar pick in there, and with the edge, the point of the pick, there it is there, the point of the pick facing inward to the guitar. So it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, but this is basically how I would hold a pick standard picking. So I've got a bit of a bend in my thumb, you can see there. My index finger is curved. I'm pinching the pick between the pad of my thumb and the side of my distal phalanx of my index finger. And to play the guitar with standard picking, all we're going to do is add in a little bit of up and down motion from our wrist, and that's going to give us some standard picking. Cool. So that's basically it. Now, when we have a closer look at the pick angle, we can discover a few things. So if I over-exaggerate the movement, see if I can get that. On a downward stroke, I'm going to hit the string, or I'm going to strike the string with the underface of the pick, but with the front edge. So we're going to go that way. So the underface of the pick, but the front edge, which is, well, it's the top edge there, if you can see it. So when that hits the guitar, or when it hits the string, front edge of the pick, but the underface front edge. And then when I have an upstroke, I am going to strike the string with the upper face of the pick, but with the back edge. So back edge, upper face of the pick, and that's going to look like this. And if I put them both together, so what we're also going to get while we're playing standard picking, we're going to get this motion that's also coming from our forearm. So as I bring the forearm down, I'm going to get a bit of a flick from my wrist as that's going up and down, and I'm going to get some extra velocity out of the standard picking approach. So not much, but you can see a little bit of forearm movement there. See if I can get in frame a bit more. There we go. You might be able to hear the pop. Or there's a little flick that comes along with standard picking. That's the attack of standard picking. It has quite a high velocity due to the fact of the way in which the string and the pick interact with the angle of the pick, but also with the wrist motion and a bit of help from the forearm as it comes down. So standard picking has quite a high velocity output. It has quite a high velocity attack, and I've always found it a bit difficult to tame that attack off and to make the attack a bit softer and a bit rounder and not so, what's the word I'm looking for? Not so prominent, not so abrupt. Part of it is because of the squeeze that comes from the if I don't get that in frame, the squeeze that comes from the thumb, that bend in the thumb joint really squeezes down on the pick. And if you've got a guitar in your hands, you'll find it quite hard to squeeze the pick really hard, but play really light. It just wants to, I don't know about you guys, but I want to play really hard when I do that. Okay, so if we're going to talk about backward picking, there's a couple of things that we need to do that are a little bit different to standard picking. So first, how we hold the pick. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to have a curve in our first finger, but it's going to be a little bit different. Our pick position is going to look a bit like this without the pick. So what you'll notice already is that our thumb has no bend in it. Thumb has to be extended and locked. Our first finger has a curve, but it's not as rounded as with standard picking. And we are going to pinch the pick in between the pad of the thumb or the end of the thumb and sort of the pad of the first finger. It's going to look a little bit like that if I place the pick in the middle there. Hopefully you can see that. Let's get that in frame. So again, lock thumb, pad of the thumb and the pad of the first finger working together to grip the pick. It's actually quite tricky to put that in frame. It's really counterintuitive. And we are going to strike with our wrist, but it's a bit more of it's different motion. You can see that there's less movement there, whereas with standard picking it was like that, whereas with backward picking, it's kind of a bit more like that. So this is more the George Benson approach. When you pick all the right notes. Okay, so we're not going to have that big energetic strike from our forearm anymore. A lot of the movement just comes from our wrist. And I think you can tell there's a bit more of a sort of a swipe action that comes along with backward picking. It's not so much of an up and down thing. It's just sort of more of a swipe, really, that happens. Also, what we need to talk about is the angle at which the pick interacts with the string. So standard picking, we were interacting with the string in that kind of an angle. Backward picking, we're going to change that angle, so it's going to be like that. So when we have a downstrike, we are hitting the string with the underface of the pick, but with the back edge. And when we hit, well, it's going to look like this. And when we have an upstroke, we are going to hit the string with the upper face of the pick, but with the front edge. So front edge, upper face. So I've found the backward picking has a softer, rounder attack in comparison to standard picking. And I found it much easier to be able to play within a dynamic range when using backward picking as opposed to standard picking. Let's see if I can get an example happening here. Whereas standard picking, backward. I can also play really hard with backward picking, and it doesn't tire or bring any tension to my thumb. I don't get fatigued. So that's going to be like this. So I can get that pop back if I want, that single coil. So they are some of the differences and similarities, but more differences between standard picking and backward picking. Again, there's nothing wrong with standard picking. This doesn't mean that backward picking is superior or better in any way. They're just two different styles that will give you two different results. So maybe mess around with both of them, see which one you like best. This next video might give you an insight into why I became hooked on the gospel guitar style. This is Erick Walls and Isaiah Sharkey at the 2013 International Guitar Summit in Durham, North Carolina. Not only does this technique have huge practical advantages, it has a long history and can be traced back to one of the earliest pioneers of modern guitar playing. I followed the lineage of African American gospel guitar players that utilised the backward picking technique. As of 2018, these are some of the gospel guitar players I've been really interested in. Kevin Byrd, Jabari Johnson, Chris Payton, Isaiah Sharkey, Rick Watford, Erick Walls, and of course, Jairus Mozee. All of these players utilise an inclined picking angle and a locked thumb. Their guitar vocabulary is very similar, yet they have individuality and a voice of their own. The backward picking style is also evident in an earlier generation of gospel guitarists. Players like Jubu Smith, Jonathan Dubose Jr., Spanky Alford, and Greg Happy Guitar Haynes. Many of the guitar players already mentioned cite George Benson and Wes Montgomery as influences of their guitar playing. This made sense to me due to the stylistic nature of gospel guitar playing and how it shares similarities with George and Wes's style. In his autobiography, George openly discusses his affinity for Wes. There is a commonality between George, Wes, and the gospel guitar style. I believe George Benson's style of guitar playing links the gospel guitar style with Wes Montgomery. You see, George uses a pick, but he also plays thumb-style jazz guitar just like Wes. Here's George's thumb style. And this is Wes's thumb style. It's George who modernised Wes's thumb style of guitar playing. By using a pick, George can gain speed, volume, and accuracy, but still retain the warm tone of the thumb style. I believe the gospel guitar style has ties to Wes Montgomery's thumb through the adaptation of George Benson. Regardless of the origins and influence of this picking technique, there is evidence and a long history of a locked thumb and an inclined picking technique being utilised by players outside of the gospel genre. Take, for example, Emily Remler. Jim Hall. Russell Malone. Martin Taylor. Cheryl Bailey. JC Styles. Peter Farrell. Dan Wilson. And Cecil Alexander. There are also contemporary guitar players who utilise the backward picking technique. Players such as Jimi Hendrix, Tosin Abasi, Ola England, Eric Gales, Carlos Santana, Sean Lane, Mono Neon, Bo Diakowitz, Cory Wong, Sinister Gates, Ari O'Neill, Paul Jackson Jr., and Paul Gilbert.
Need for it to go over quickly, I would sort of angle it back like that. And it sounded good.
There is also a similar thumb position with gypsy jazz guitarist Borelli Legren. And again, a similar locked thumb by oud player Rahim Al-Haj. Rahim shares the same hooked thumb we saw from Montgomery, Benson, Abasi, and many of the other backward-picking guitarists. It's possible all these players share a medical condition known as hypermobility, or better known as being double-jointed. Interestingly, there are studies that show higher rates of hypermobility in African and Asian diasporas than with Caucasian diasporas. Ethnicity aside, we've seen how the backward picking technique has been utilised throughout the world. This just means people with hypermobility of the thumb joint might have a natural tendency to use backward picking when playing guitar. But even without hypermobility, the backward picking technique can be utilised by anyone who is hoping to improve their guitar picking. I previously mentioned the low velocity threshold that occurs naturally with backward picking. Let's have a closer look as I record some examples of standard and backward picking and compare their volume and velocity. First, standard picking. And now, backward picking. We can see from the recorded waveform, standard picking has a high velocity attack that quickly tapers off. So the struck note will have a large impact, but the sustaining volume of the note is about half the volume of the initial strike. Whereas backward picking has a softer strike due to the incline angle of the pick and the locked thumb. The result is a smaller difference in attack and sustaining volume. There is less tapering of the sound, and the transient of the note isn't as big. This means we can turn our amps up and get more volume with a warmer tone. Let's look at another example. Here's standard picking. And here's backward picking. Although we can see similar peaks in the waveform of each example, there is a lot more consistency from the backward picking example. With backward picking, we can achieve great sound, consistency, and zero tension, resulting in a warm, round guitar tone. Here's a song from my childhood that I've arranged using the backward picking technique. So one of the secondary techniques that we can use with backward picking would be something known as pick slanting. Now, pick slanting is a technique that's utilized by a lot of rock guitarists, and it allows them to keep the pick out of the plane of the strings, which helps them move across the plane of strings when they need to pick. So the whole idea with pick slanting is you are going to lead the pick with your hand in the direction that you're moving. So if we are going to ascend the notes, we are going to lead with our hand. If we're going to descend the notes, we're going to lead again with our hand but struck upwards. So instead, ascending the notes, we're going to strike down, and descending the notes, we're going to strike up. And the hand is going to lead the direction of the pick. So pick slanting can look like this. So as you noticed, I'm leading the direction of the pick. This works equally as well with backward picking and is quite natural. It enables us to get quite high speeds. A little bit messy, but you get the picture. Another technique that works well with backward picking is something that is known as rest stroke picking. Now, rest stroke picking comes from the classical discipline, and it is known as upper yandle. So the upper yandle picking style would be where you strike a string, in this case the A string, and you come to rest on the E string. So again, strike the A string, it's a through strike, and a rest strike where the finger rests against the E string. This can happen with backward picking. However, we're going to go in the opposite direction, where we're going to strike the A string and we've come to rest on the D string. And we could strike the D string and come to rest on the G. And strike the G, come to rest on the B, and strike the B and also come to rest on the E string. Rest stroke picking is something that we don't necessarily think of, but again, because of the natural angle, incline, and slant of the pick, you naturally find yourself utilizing rest stroke picking without knowing it. So another type of, another technique that we could utilize with backward picking would be the hybrid picking style. So hybrid picking can sometimes be known as the chicken picking style. We can still use backward picking with that. It might just sound a little bit different. It's not as authentic as country chicken picking, but it can still work. But another way that we can use hybrid picking with the backward picking technique is in more of a jazz finger style. So we can emulate piano chords and the way that they slowly unroll. One last thing that we can look at is the tonal variation between the incline angle of the pick versus a hard incline angle, like a 90-degree angle with George Benson, and flattening out the pick and maybe changing the direction, so we can look at the difference in tone. So the George Benson technique, where I'm going to go as 90 degrees as I can, and I'm slowly going to rotate the pick around so you can get an idea of the tonal difference.
With backward picking, I've been able to play bebop, funk, soul, rock, country, jazz, pop, and many other styles.
So open your eyes.
To conclude this film, I have two short examples to share. The first demonstrates my technique in January 2017, and the second shows my development over the following 21 months.